thanks to Simon Fraser, thanks to the Century Group. I've got to say, you yielded on the greenest city in North America so quickly. You really shouldn't have. First of all, who are we? Are we architects, planners, municipal folk, developers, citizens, voters, travelers, eaters, okay, engineers, public health folk, clients of mine. No, okay. Who have I forgotten? Who's feeling left out? Where are you?
Bankers.
Bankers. You're a banker. Okay. Any others? Nonprofit. Okay. Who else? Students. Oh, we need you. The next generation. So nice. Okay. So a good, diverse crowd. Thanks for coming out. I am delighted to be here, and I like it here in Vancouver so much I'm going to speak here twice. Speak tomorrow night at the University of British Columbia. So if a friend didn't make it tonight, you can invite them to come tomorrow. But I like to ask two questions at the start of my talk because I am really focused on the nature of how the change that we want to make in the world. There are two key questions, which is how many architects does it take to change a light bulb? Does it have to be a light bulb? How many engineers does it take to change a light bulb? Change? What's change? You're a flat crowd. And those were really funny jokes. Okay, all right. I'll give it to you. All right. So anyway, what I want to talk tonight about is this topic, sustainable urbanism. I've written a book on the topic. It relates closely to the work we've been doing for several years on LEED neighborhood development. And particularly, I'm here in town working with Century Group at a site in Tawasin, which takes on the most challenging work, I think, which is how to shape growth at the suburban rural edge. So you'll hear more about that from me. Farr Associates in Chicago, we're a small firm, 20. We work, kind of across the spectrum, master planning and urban design, form-based coding, high-performance buildings, and historic preservation. And we set for ourselves several years back a mission to design sustainable human environments. And that answering the question of when we know we have succeeded at our mission has put me on this journey of essentially volunteerism and frankly leadership nationally in the LEED arena and on the senior board and other things. So you hear more about that, but we're on a journey to figure it out. Sustainable urbanism for me this is sort of our version of it, has its roots in 1999. For those of you who like timelines and histories, you're going to love this, because I love those intricate little stories. But in 1998, we had done this very simple sort of sketch rendering of a transit-oriented development project in the city of Chicago on the west side. And it was a fairly drab, kind of brown Lewis Mumford palette of a nice little TOD. And so mixed-use buildings around a simple park next to a transit stop. Urbanism, fine, good. But watch what happens. So in 1999, we got our first commission to do a LEED building. Won't even ask about LEED. I assume you all know, and if you don't, ask me afterwards, right? So, but we did our first LEED building, and it was a LEED Platinum. The term, by the way, I'll save that for later. This is called the Chicago Center for Green Technology and was the first initiative that Mayor Daley undertook after putting a vegetated roof on City Hall to advance his goal of making Chicago the greenest city in the country. He opened his checkbook and said, let's go for it. Let's put everything in that we can think to do, and then we'll figure it out later what worked. It's very nice. It's only happened once so far. But all the attributes of LEED, and they are known to you: sustainable sites, energy and atmosphere, indoor environmental quality, water conservation, and materials and resources, were issues that interested the architects in our office. But we found, and this, there's the detention basin on the left, underneath which we placed our geothermal heating and cooling system. So we have sort of systems integration going on there, and that increased the thermal transfer efficiency and the like. On the right, what was formerly called a ditch is now called a bioswale, and so on. It's geothermal, displacement ventilation, all the kind of whiz-bang sort of integrated design approaches in buildings. But what I realized about my office was that the concerns about the transit-oriented development of walkability, density, mix of use, connectivity, all the things we know are associated with urbanism, didn't come up at all in the green building. And the issues we were addressing in the green building, water conservation, energy efficiency, materials of local and recycled content, were not coming up at all in the urbanism. Incidentally, this was it ended up being the third LEED Platinum building in the world, but it was the first LEED Platinum building that was served by public transit. So it's very easy to actually get a LEED Platinum without public transit. So that says something, I think, about the values of USGBC. Then and now. Green roof is not always green, or it isn't four colors. But so here's the re-rendering. We had occasion to sort of draw again what we had drawn in 1998, 1 year later. So here it is. Every building has a vegetated roof. Every building is mounted with photovoltaic panels. The Central Park, which was sort of a placeholder for an open space, now performs very specific sort of integrated functions. It has a district energy system. It is a stormwater park, meaning it captures the water off the adjacent streets and roofs and recharges it into the groundwater. The district energy system was conceived to exhaust its carbon dioxide output into the greenhouse where the plants will love it. And so it was sort of very high level, conceptual, sort of shallow but high level systems integration. And so this was our kind of jumping off point. This is my first sustainable urbanist sketch, if you will. So 1999. So then we were off to the races. We liked drawing it a lot. We were sort of having a lot of fun. And we would get hired for projects. This was another TOD station area plan in a south suburb for Chicago. And we rendered it with, there you have it again, the green roofs, the photovoltaics, and so on. And our client, the Regional Transit Authority, said, Doug, we like the TOD plan, but could you ditch all that green stuff? It's confusing to us. I don't know why you're doing it, and we didn't ask you to do it. Could you please redo the drawing without the green stuff? So that was a setback. We thought we were on to something. We thought the world would be excited, but we were told to sort of erase it and go backwards. So that was a setback. This is a TOD plan we did in 99, 2000 in Minneapolis, 46th and Hiawatha. And so here we are trying again. So it's a little town center. And we, in a community meeting, asked the question, the big fight was, of course, about density. When we started the project, the neighbors said, you can build a town center, but it can't be taller than 1.5 stories. Kind of a problem. So density was the fight. So we had a series of 4, community meetings. It was great involvement. We earned their trust, and we were now at 4 stories. So we had a 4-story town center. We thought, we died and gone to heaven. But I asked the question in a public meeting. I said, what if the buildings were green? Could they be more dense? Show of hands. All the hands go up and say, yes, you can add a story if they're green. I didn't define what green was. LEED was unknown. I wasn't making it a complicated question. But I felt at that moment there was an aha that went on, which is to say somehow there's this link between things we value in urbanism, that is density, and, if you will, the pixie dust of green. Somehow it's a sort of a magic salve, and it allowed good things to go on. So undeterred, we went on, and this is probably my favorite project from this era, which was a master plan for a little town called Normal, Illinois. And it's very much middle America, Normal, Illinois. And in this case, we did it was a 10-acre master plan in a very little small town. We proposed a circular intersection and circular plaza at the center of it, which was, yes, you guessed it, it's a stormwater park. It catches the water off the adjacent streets. All the buildings around it are proposed to be LEED certified. And Normal became the first town in the world, city in the world, to require private sector development to be LEED certified. So Middle America had somehow drunk the Kool-Aid. You know, now we're jazzed. We're completely jazzed. You can't even talk to us about it. It's like, oh my God, normal's first. They beat Vancouver, they beat Austin, they beat Boulder, they beat San Francisco, they beat Boston, etc. Little old Normal, Illinois. So we were pretty happy with ourselves, right? But we're sort of careening, from client to client, and nobody sort of gets what we're after. There's another project that I wanted to sort of mention from the same period, that all of which was pointing to a need for greater definition and a need to make a market in better planning and better design. This was a project we did which was in a sort of developing rural edge condition outside Chicago, wherein we proposed to basically build on half the land and conserve half the land. And this was, it's a farm, and so it was a conservation strategy. And the plan got shot down on the basis that a mere 70 acres of farmland was a toy farm, that isn't actually how people farm nowadays, and that you needed larger, contiguous, mechanized, agriculture. Agribusiness was the only model. And so this died 1,000 deaths. And you'll hear this theme a couple more times tonight. So the search for definition and the search for a market led me to be interested in pursuing and leading and now chairing for the last 5 years, Lead for Neighborhood Development. You'll hear more about it in a minute. It also led to writing the book Sustainable Urbanism, for sale in the lobby. So, if you haven't seen this image before, it is a laugh image. You can laugh now. I'm going to pour some water. Why I include it is the thesis of the book says the U.S., and you can vote yourselves to be included in this club or not, but the U.S. is on the wrong course. And we see several things going on. One is the persistent substitution of mechanical effort for human. With it, there is a persistent growth in the girth of the average American. And with it, is Larry Frank here? I don't know if he's here or coming. Anyway, the National Institutes of Health in the U.S. has published this study that says we are on a trajectory where the children, the people, the next generation coming up may live 5 years less than their parents. And so that's the first time in human history where we've actually had a shorter lifespan. That's the trajectory we Americans are on. If you haven't seen the obesity maps, here's one in a series, and this speaks to the percentage of obesity by state, with some notable exceptions. Colorado, Vermont, and Connecticut, I think, are the skinny states, and then Louisiana, Mississippi, and West Virginia, more than 30% obese. So there's a human health need out in the country, and you're going to have two of the better speakers, Larry Frank and Jim Sellis, talking about that. We Americans drive an amazing amount. I call it, driving at light speed. Americans in 2000 drove 2.7 trillion miles. A light year is 5.8 trillion miles. And by the year 2025, we Americans will drive 1 light year per year. And these are big numbers, right? And these are routine trips. This is, dumb trips to Walmart, dumb trips to the store, dumb trips to work, things like that. So clearly we need to tackle that. Food, another thing is a concern I think that many of us have. That is the fresh plate of fruits or vegetables that you eat each day in the U.S. travels on average 1,548 miles is kind of the latest number on it. But it's a transatlantic salad is what it is. And obviously we've got to sort of take this on. So there are all these issues out there. We're not done. We love have you seen The Onion? You all see The Onion? It's online. If you don't get it, a hard copy, get it online. I love this newspaper. And the headline reads, 98% of U.S. commuters favor public transit for others. And if you read the body of it, it goes on to say that what's great about those people that take public transit means it's less congested for me to drive. Very opportunistic stuff. But all of these issues are out there, and you will hear living in harmony with nature, joke slide, etc. The children of California, 11 years old, English-speaking 11-year-old Californians spend 89% of their time in either inside buildings or inside enclosed transit. And so we've become an indoor species. So I'm ticking these off: health concerns, transport concerns, living very long supply lines, fuel dependence, and so on. All issues that are not tethered to the current dialogue about climate change. So you'll hear more about this in a minute. So here's the map that scares those of us who live in Illinois. Illinois is Michigan is the mitten, right? So Illinois is the one below that. So on the right, it shows you a chart that basically says Illinois will have the summers of East Texas in the year 2095. So the climate is changing, and we could easily have the cactus as our state plant in not so many years. So there's a lot of things going on. Now, Al Gore, who we all love, I think I have a bone to pick with this man, and I'll tell you what it is. When he, at the end of the movie and in the book, they're essentially identical. When it came to things that pertain to land use and transportation, he punted. And so if you can, I can't actually read this from here, but basically, here you go. Reduce the number of miles you drive by walking, biking, carpooling, or taking mass transit whenever possible. Now that is not a mandate. That is not an urgent call to action. That is not leadership. That is, if the bus hits you, get on it, right? So there's something where Al Gore, who I credit with being a good communicator, will not concern himself with transportation and land use. And so this is my sort of diagnostic of where we are today on the climate change debate. You would think that if we changed and installed the correct light bulbs, the problem would be solved, right? All we need are the right light bulbs, or if you're a little more advanced, what we really need are the right vehicles. We need, Priuses. If we all drove Priuses, the world would be, the problem would be solved. Or if you're really progressive, we need really efficient buildings. So it's one of those threes, and it's always a focus on the efficiency of a widget, right? It's an object that can be made more efficient. It's not our lifestyle, it's not the way we organize our lives, live, work, and play in remote places. It's the efficiency of things. Now there's a problem with this thesis, which is this. If you make cars more efficient, for example, people will actually drive more miles. And so the CAFE standards, which the Senate and House just passed, which go into effect in 2020, assure that we will drive on average 5% more because it will be less expensive to do so. So similarly, the average house in the US, starting from 1970 to 2005, has grown 60% in floor area. So meanwhile, the average size of the family has shrunk from 3.2 to 2.5 people. So fewer people living in a house that's 60% bigger, each square foot of which, incidentally, has gotten slightly more energy efficient over the years because of building codes and the like. But the houses are growing in size at a faster pace than they are increasing in efficiency per square foot. So efficiency ain't gonna get you there, is the punchline. There's also this issue, and who's a USGBC member, by the way? I should have asked that. Green Building Council? Wow. So there's very little overlap between tonight and tomorrow, so this is a good thing. I'm going to meet the other people. But in the debate, the Green Building Council, to their credit, has done an amazing job of saying, it's the buildings, it's the buildings, it's the buildings. They're really good at that. And if you are attuned to this, there is the airspace taken up with saying it's the buildings covers the things that I want to talk to you tonight about. But here's a study that came out last fall from the Environmental Building News, which is the mouthpiece of essentially the green building movement. And what they concluded, the question was, the research they undertook was this: for an average office building, what takes more energy, the operation of the building or the transport to get to and from the building? So what the Environmental Building News concluded was this, that for an average office building of average efficiency, the transportation was 30 30% more energy than the building itself. What was really interesting was if the building were of high performance, that is, met a 2004 energy efficiency standard, the transportation jumped to be 137% more energy than the building operation. So this is the Environmental Building News talking about the relative priorities of building energy and transport energy. So clearly, transportation matters. So what I'm proposing to you is that we add a couple of new things to this line, and I'll talk to you more about it. So in terms of this sort of land use discussion, and back to that first drawing of mine where the urbanism and the green building concerns start to merge, I find that there are three movements that inspired LEED neighborhood development, that inspired the book Sustainable Urbanism, and I think are really the pillars of where we are today in sustainability. And I want to take you through them briefly. You know them too well. So the pioneering reforms of sustainable urbanism, all of which trace to April of 1996. Go figure. I'm not sure what that was going on there, but that's what happened. So the smart growth movement, its 10 principles were written in 1996. They are known to you. People know smart growth principles, yes or no? Some not. It was written to be a document that would bring together a coalition of people to advocate, to say essentially that not all development was bad, some of it was preferred, some of it was actually pretty good for the environment, and it was to bring together a coalition of local citizen activists, environmentalists, mayors, city councils, developers, planners, and the like. And so the 10 principles are essentially, I sub-organize them into these 4 categories. Settle in the right location, which is we favor inner city and existing built places, and we favor avoiding the bad places. Compact, connected, and complete places, essentially make neighborhoods and walkable places. Then offer choice to citizens, and then conduct development approvals and design with a fair and transparent process. And if there was one chart from my experience working very closely with the smart growth movement that sort of summarizes it all, it is this map of Atlanta, Georgia. And if you can't read it, basically the purple, which is at the center of Atlanta, shows people driving on a daily basis very little, less than 9 miles. And the orange at the edge is as high as 40 miles. And the average in Atlanta is 35 miles per person per day in a car. 35 miles per person per day, Atlanta average. So they are hot on this. They are absolutely obsessed with this idea of central locations. Hold that thought. The CNU, the charter was signed in April of 1996. It is known to you. Are there CNU members here? A few of you? Thank you. Good, good, good. It is a great movement. It unites all these different strains into what I think is deftly called one interrelated community building challenge. Andreas was here a couple months ago. I'm sure he said his piece. I don't need to say too much other than there were a lot of rediscoveries when CNU came on. The embrace of traditional urbanism, the embrace of traditional architecture. There's three types from different regions of the country. The rediscovery of the neighborhood. And I think this is increasingly my most powerful insight from the CNU is this idea that places, the traditional places that the CNU emulates and steals its stuff from, for the most part developed in the presence of some form of public transportation. It might have been a stagecoach stop, a Pony Express stop, a railroad station, 2 trains cross, a narrowing in a river, whatever it was. But the transportation and land use were always integrated in some way to make the traditional urbanism that the CNU loves and emulates. So a great insight. The third pillar to me of sustainable urbanism is the U.S. Green Building Council, known to you very well. In the early 1990s, it was the same, in the mid-1990s, it was the same size as the CNU. It had, about 1,000 members. This would be about 1998, 1999. It has done this. It's on a Malthusian curve, not to say the flies will die, but it's at a very sort of steep growth curve. So What I want to talk about now is what I call the silos or the half measures of sustainability, which is all of those three groups that I've just talked about are insular. They are self-reinforcing. They give one another awards for achievements in their own sort of area, and that they devalue the work of the other groups. So you get a Smart Growth Award, you might get a CNU Award, you won't get a Green Building Award, absolutely. So let me just sort of take you through some of these. These are the things that we encounter in our work, and certainly through LEAD ND, that come up and present themselves as sustainable. So here's one, it's called low impact development. So it's also called conservation development. And in this case, you can ask yourself, what problem was this little cluster of 5 houses conceived to solve, right? What was the problem that it addressed? What exactly about it is low impact? Well, it's not clear to me. What they do is they tend to be good at stormwater, and they tend to embrace an approach to native plantings. But other than that, there's nothing sustainable about this to my eye. It's too small, you have to drive everywhere, there's no destinations, et cetera, et cetera. But this, for a lot of the country, comes across as sustainable development. There it is, half measure. They did one or two things well. LEAD, I have many bones to pick with LEAD. It's a wonderful system, but there's nothing that would make that Hardee's restaurant, as I called pejoratively in the footer, LEED Platinum eligible, unwalkable fatty food shack, right? There's nothing, that fatty food shack is a menace to society. It is the worst possible, building type and land use, and look at its position across an intersection. I mean, how hungry would you have to be to want to go to that Hardee's? But there's nothing in the LEED system preventing that fatty food shack from being a LEED Platinum building, right? Think of how many things you have to overlook for that to get your highest award. I mean, there's something going on there, right? Here's one that is a Chicago project recently. It's a green building, residential building, that apparently was having a hard time selling. So what did they do? They started offering free parking. So, I mean, to the urbanists in the crowd, if there's any Don Chupistas here in Vancouver, you know what I'm talking about. Free parking is the most corrosive, cancerous thing you can do to encourage people to drive. Absolutely, without a question. So could you undermine yourself, a little more quickly? And then this critique I deliver lovingly and in person when available. And Marina from DPZ is in the front row smiling at me. She heard this the other day. But the gist of it, this is Seaside. Have people been to Seaside, Florida? It is a lovely place. My family vacations there. It's everything that it's said to be. It is high-performance urbanism in this manner. That is to say, when you get there, it's a resort. When you get there, the average is 6 car trips per week. So less than 1 a day per person, which is remarkable. And the miles are very, very low. So this is the antithesis of Atlanta. But from a green building perspective, look at Seaside. There's a couple things. It's on the shore, and all of the siding there is specified out of true wood. So to keep the place together, it needs to be painted for tens of thousands of dollars every 4 to 7 years. The air conditioning condensers rust out on average every 5 or 7 years, something like that. And then the worst of all, and this is across the country, but it is notable in Seaside because it is such a lovely place. The air conditioning condenser, they're good, tight, walkable urbanism, wonderful. The air conditioning condenser sits in the slot between 2 houses. And so if one person on a block is hot and turns on their air conditioning, they close their windows, the air conditioner comes on, sort of a nice hum gets going, and it's hot, and then the person next to them that shares a gangway closes their windows, turns on their air conditioning, heats and noises up the next gangway, and so on. And so windows shut, air conditioners go on, windows shut, air conditioners go on, and in a couple of days, everyone's indoors. That's all, the whole of America. So I caught it at Seaside, I sort of hold it up at Seaside. Seaside is, one of a million neighborhoods probably that does the same thing. So anyway, hang on a little closer. Sure. this is my call to evolution. So it's meant to be both kind of a timeline of when the organizations that are called out there were founded, but it's also this belief that we need to sort of transcend where we each are. You know, all of the little, each of these reforms is absolutely essential, but we need to evolve to the next level. You'll get it. And there's the book. Yeah, we're selling the book. So, so sustainable urbanism, rather than simply being, you know, eco-cities or green stuff, has a specific definition, and it is this: walkable, transit-served urbanism integrated with high-performance buildings and high-performance infrastructure. So those three things together. Excuse me, and you'll see more and more examples of it. The book's thesis is we don't have time or money to do these half measures. What's the point of building a green building that's in the wrong location? It might have to be torn down because it's in the wrong location, and so on. Second part of the book says that sustainable urbanism is going to outperform and outcompete sprawl in the years to come. I say by the year 2030, who knows, but that's the goal. And that there's a three-step process that will actually get us to that outcome, and that's a desirable outcome for the country. And then I say to British Columbia, you know, this is your chance. In fact, you're already in many ways ahead of the curve, but you can do so even more so. So here we go. Step one, 3 steps. Here we go. Establish relevant weights and measures. Now, this is where LEED ND, I think, comes to be crucial. Have people looked at the LEED ND standard? A few people? Quick, you know, give it a 1, 2, or 3. Is it terrible, middle, great? You know, or just shout it out. What do you think? Terrible?
It apologizes too much for suburban approaches. It doesn't really apply well to highly urban environments.
Okay, good. Any other shout outs? Okay, we're going to get back to this man. Okay, I agree with you. It has many challenges. 3-way partnership. It is, you know, it's the first ever certification for sustainable land developments. It can apply to private sector development, and it can be used by municipal planners as well. You need to have multiple buildings and some infrastructure. The projects that seek certification under it can be single use. Ideally, they're multi-use, but if they're single-use and they enhance the context, that's a good thing. And it's also shaping the rest of LEED. It answers 3 big questions. Where is your project? And you'll see the sort of smart growth principles called out there. What is the nature of your land use? What are you proposing? A compact, connected, and complete neighborhood. And then finally, how is your project being built and maintained? Green construction and technology, and high-performance infrastructure. So those 3 things. So the first thing is in the LEED system, there are prerequisites. Those are things you must do. And then there are credits. There are things that you have to do enough of to earn a score. So the first thing that LEED ND does in its current draft form, and this was a strong-arm tactic of the smart growth movement, to get a prerequisite, and here it is. It's called a smart location. So this was metropolitan Grand Rapids, Michigan, right? Watch how this filter drops over the whole thing. So if you are more than essentially a half a mile outside the existing built boundaries of an existing metropolitan area, you don't qualify for LEED ND. So it was explicitly written to not certify leapfrog development. And there are a lot of new urbanist practices and projects that are famous for having been leapfrog development. So the smart growth movement was waiting in a little cave in a corner to zing the CNU, and this is there it got it, right? So there are a couple of little exceptions. One is if you're extending transit service out into the countryside, that can go, and that's actually done. It's a good practice, but it's not much done in the U.S. If your project is out in a disqualifying location, but it can deliver above average car performance, that is below average vehicle miles traveled, it can qualify. And then other considerations. Within where the smart location and linkage, there are a bunch of credits, and here's a big list of them, and I'm not going to go over them too much. In the second category is neighborhood pattern and design. And in this area, we have two prerequisites, and I want to talk about them. One is no gated communities. Are there gated communities up this way? Not much? Yes, but mostly no. Sounds like not much. It's a big problem, as you know, in California, Florida, Texas, places like that. So we just prevent them, or we don't allow them, we don't certify them. Second one is minimum density of 7 dwelling units per net acre. In the US, the average net density of a newly built project is 2 dwelling units per net acre. So at 7, which is an incredible waste of land, but it's exactly what the country's pumping out. So at 7, we're 3.5 times above the national average. Lots of credits there. And then finally, in the third section, neighborhood green construction technology, there's one prerequisite, and it's simply erosion control. Here are all the credits. So it's been going on a long time. You can read that for yourself. What I want to point out to you is that we are intending in a couple of years' time to write a zoning code version of LEED ND. So once we get the bugs will never, I suppose, be perfect, but once the bugs are mostly out, that's the plan. And it's already being adopted by many municipalities, excuse me, as aspects of development regulations. It's currently in its pilot phase. We had 371 projects say they wanted to register, 238 did. They paid fees up front between $8,000 and $20,000 if they thought that they could meet the prerequisites and earn a minimum certification. So there are a number of worthy projects that did not start the process, and I'll talk about a couple of them. 104 square miles, it's bigger than Boston. All of the projects sort of aggregated together. The smallest is 1/6 of an acre, and the largest is in the thousands. So quite a variety. And what we found was that we got, of the 238 projects, we got 80% were either brownfield, redevelopment, or infill projects. And so that priority on projects built in existing locations succeeded wildly. It has a downside. I'll talk about that in a minute. Oops, excuse me. Here's the map of US projects. There are 208 in the US, 29 in Canada, and 1 in China. So can't show you the map of Canada. I'm sorry I don't have it. Governments are using it in a variety of ways for developer entitlements, for deciding public-private partnerships and infrastructure funding, and for impact fees, things like that. So LEED ND is relevant in a bunch of different ways, and I want to go over these. 32 of our 56 credits and prerequisites have a carbon or a climate change impact. And we had written the standard really starting in 2003. The bones of it are 2003 and 2004, so we were a little before, inconvenient truth, but we think we sort of hit it pretty well. We took LEED ND and had it reviewed by the Centers for Disease Control and a number of experts, including Larry Frank and Jim Salas, 2 of your speakers who will be here later this month, who are in this picture, Jim and Larry. And they concluded that 57% of the standards as written either had specific research that backed them or were consistent with known public health research, and that the balance of the standard was, in their opinion, in their expert opinion, still a good standard, even if there wasn't research. So we took that as a sort of rounding, a really strong endorsement. And so this is the quote from Dr. Howard Frumkin. Emerging scientific evidence increasingly shows that LEED ND criteria are powerful ways to promote public health. So CDC stamp of approval, very nice. What's interesting is the National Association of Homebuilders recently came out with their critique. And just read the red stuff. LEED ND promotes, quote, an unproven connection between health and walkability. Now this is a scandal. This is an absolute scandal. The National Association of Homebuilders has become the new tobacco industry. It's an undefensible position, and it's a really interesting moment in time. There's a couple more subtle things that I want to share with you here in this sort of second critique. The NAHB continues. Overall, LEED ND appears to be making some sociological judgments, and it is questionable whether these belong in a rating system, said planner Ed Tombani. So what's interesting about this is that the NAHB could never be accused of any sort of sociological judgments, in segregating people by income and forcing them to drive cars everywhere. That is not any sort of judgment or assessment. So here's my critique of Lead ND, and it's by no means exhaustive. There's a lot of issues, a lot of things that need to be strengthened. But number one is the prerequisites are a poor tool to balance competing trade-offs. That smart growth list of 10 things, they're all in conflict at some point, right? So in writing Lead ND, what we found were some of the best projects were the ones that took on things that seemed to be irreconcilable opposites. The prerequisite says this side wins, and it draws a very hard line in the sand, and it's a tough tool, and we have a political fight to overcome, to convince the smart growth people to relax some of those. Second one is it seems to be, in my opinion, having a limited influence at the sprawling, developing edge in many metropolitan areas, certainly in the US, probably in Canada. Because of that smart location prerequisite, all the actions actually in that black zone I showed of Grand Rapids, all the actions were exempt from being involved in it because we drew such a tight line. So sprawl's going on, near as I can tell, unabated. Lead ND is having no effect right now. So that's a huge problem. And then the third thing is it's an after-the-fact report card. It does not tell you how to design. It is simply a measurement tool. How you design your project, it comes in and gives you a rating. So a couple things I want to talk about here. One is East Fraserlands. Is a project here in Vancouver. It's an excellent project, and we worked with the developer, and I'm sharing this as the historic photo of what it looked like before the development was proposed, which in the eyes of Lead ND sort of tells the whole story. If you can believe this, the site is kind of where all that industry is. In the current LEED draft standard, the Lead ND draft standard, this did not qualify as a previously developed site. And it has to do with, it's a very arcane argument, but it has to do with the site boundaries, including enough of the wooded area that you see sort of at the top of the picture so that it didn't achieve the 75% of the land area had to be previously developed. So on its face, it's laughably wrong. So East Fraserlands is a wonderful project. It didn't meet that one prerequisite, and it is proving to be an influencer to fix Lead ND. So it's been shown to the core committee what's wrong, how could we have gotten it so wrong, and it's a good project in lots of other ways. Second area that it was completely took a correct approach, but Lead ND didn't see it coming, was Lead ND set a kind of default 100-foot setback from all riparian areas. Didn't occur to us that there might actually be scientists who could make judgment calls that said it can be less or it can be more, and the very unique, the unique arrangement and culture of science helping the land use planning along the Fraser River was kind of eye-opening to me when I encountered this through the East Fraserlands project. So Lead ND, again, didn't allow less than a 100-foot setback, which is occasionally happens here. So anyway, really instructive, great project. Lead ND didn't get it, right? So that's one. Second one, the reason I'm here, we're working with Century Group down in this site in Tawasin. And it's bounded there, as you can see. And this is another one of these projects that takes on these seemingly, irreconcilable opposites. It's an infill site to my eye. It is built on essentially all sides. Lead ND doesn't consider it an infill site again. The other one was not previously developed, and this one's not infill. This one also has a lot of good agricultural land on it. So Lead ND values infill and it values good ag land. So what do? That's what the project's about. So we don't know yet. But I think that there's a middle ground where when you add other considerations, the distance food travels, isolation that kids have from nature, things like that, there's a great story here that a great project will emerge from. Lead ND won't sort of detect it. So The third critique that I had was that Lead ND will not design your project for you. And it leaves most of the country clueless about what they're supposed to do. And so this is why I wrote the book. So first of all, I'm in love with the notion of a simple diagram. And those of you who know Clarence Perry's diagram on the left there, from 1926, it has its problems. It's got a great, lively history that we can debate. But I think it's a powerful diagram. It communicates to a lay public in a wonderful way. So we stole it. DPZ had also used it some in the 90s, updated it. We updated it as the sustainable neighborhood diagram, and here you have it. So the gist of it is that this neighborhood unit is the increment by which regions and cities should grow. So that's the first thing. And second part of it is it's conceived as a place designed so well that people will willingly meet their daily needs on foot. So pretty easy to visualize. Second part is it integrates human and natural systems governed by what I have come to believe are unwritten rules of thumb. For the most, planners may know these things, they may travel around, they have some sense of things. But what I'm trying to do with the book, and explicitly so, is to equip literally millions of Americans and Canadians as well, who together make the decisions on what our built environment looks like, but have no clue. They're not trained in this, it's not their day job, all the above, to unite around a couple of simple diagrams to say we should be asking for neighborhoods, and we should be asking for, the next one I'll show you, corridors. So in the book, the emerging thresholds in the book, which is for sale in the lobby, the fourth time I'm going to mention it, right? And I'll sign it if you want that too. That's really fun. But the emerging thresholds were written time after time. I would go to a lecture, and I would have some expert would be lecturing, and I knew they knew this question. I would say, and Bob Gibbs is the one that comes to mind. He's a retail consultant, and I'd say, Bob, I'd ask it in a room full of people. Bob, excuse me, but is there a rule of thumb you use to decide, how many rooftops it takes to support a little Main Street or something like that? He said, no, can't possibly tell you. It varies every time. It's, it's too custom, too unique. And then we'd go get a beer, and he'd be standing next to me. He said, Doug, the number's 2,000. It's like, well, Bob, why don't you just say, well, I don't like to say these things, and sometimes it's wrong, but mostly it's right. So I call that the 80% rule. So we've got 30 experts in different areas: retail, car share, transit, supportive densities, blah, 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 all these things, to share their secrets and publish them in the book. So here they are: sustainable corridors, all the topics that are under there, sustainable neighborhoods, lots of them. An area that is a hot button in green building but has not jumped the fence to urbanism is biophilia. And that is this idea that people benefit from being in contact with nature. The actual definition comes from E.O. Wilson. It's the intrinsic interdependence between humans and nature, and the sort of fondness and bond that people feel as a result. So in the neighborhood diagram, if you'll notice, think back to Perry's for a minute, biophilia is one of the things that has changed this diagram as compared to the DPZ and the Perry. Perry had a little river. DPZ eliminated the river from their diagram. It's convenient to do, and I've added it back and made it a big deal on the edge. And the thought is that nature shouldn't be something that you drive to or even take a bus to. My ideal is you can walk to it, and it should be immersive, and kids can get muddy, and there's frogs and birds and like that sort of stuff. So that's what that riparian corridor is. And then the sort of second green zone at the top there is what I call the sort of green infrastructure zone. And so to make a compact neighborhood, you want it to be compact. You don't want buildings to be more spread out than they would otherwise have to be. At the same time, you want the neighborhood to perform the services of nature. You want the neighborhood to catch and recharge all the stormwater and so on. It takes some land. So that's what that upper strip is for. Recharge stormwater, grow food, process waste, things like that. So that's the distinction. And then finally, high performance infrastructure. And I'm just going to click through a bunch of these guys, because they are really good, but a lot of detail. There are standards on, average housing types across the country, how much energy you can save by clustering buildings together. This is a chart that will tell you that if you modify a place to add vegetation a little bit versus a lot, you can triple the physical activity. Walkability, if it's a low walkability coefficient versus high, you can increase walking by 50%. So you can see physical measures in urban design and their predicted, in fact, studied outcomes. And so if you want to make a healthier community with more physical activity, here are the specifics and here are the measures. So, and also the sustainable corridor. And this is a much more complex diagram than the neighborhood. It's honestly still a work in progress, and so on. But this adds basically meeting your weekly needs, and it adds transit, because the thing that organizes the corridor is the transit. So step 2 to taking over the world is to eliminate what I call carbon era standards. We all have seen this slide, and the distinction that I want to make about it is that the market responds to regulations, and it is made easiest to entitle a project that has a segregation of uses for residential, for shopping, and the like. And so in codes right now, in zoning, codes often require minimum amounts of things that honestly we need less of. And so here's a list of them: setbacks, off-street parking, minimum lot areas per dwellings, and then other development regulations, street widths, and the like. I suggest to you, as a nefarious act, go home and do this. Cross out the word minimum and write in the word maximum. Just try it. See if anybody notices. And there's the opposite list of things that are now maximums. Cross out the word maximum, write in the word minimum. So we're regulating things absolutely, in my opinion, backwards from what they ought to be. So, and then lead ND. Lead ND is illegal across most of the United States, if only because its minimum densities are far greater than the maximum densities allowed across most of the country. So that's an opportunity to change some laws. So step 3 is to mount a national campaign to adopt sustainable urbanism. So why is this man's ugly mug on the screen before you? This man is our country's environmental president. He adopted the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act. He created the Environmental Protection Agency, NEPA, and lots of other things that we take for granted. They are our first line of defense on the environment, and presidents since have been coasting. And there's lots of reasons why the U.S. has never nationalized, since Nixon, any sort of environmental agenda. We've just been fighting a war of attrition. So, but I think things are changing. That's James Carville, the Ragin' Cajun, if you know his name. And I propose that what we need is a war room analogy, and that it's the placemaking stupid. So this is the war cry. We need a better term, but it is what it is. Now, if LEED ND did one thing, which was to reach into the very successful green building movement and say, you know what, LEED can apply to land use as well. That's what LEED ND essentially is. I want to do it a second time, and here's the example I want to share with you. This gentleman is Ed Mazria, is an architect from New Mexico, and he's come up with the standard, the 2030 Architecture Challenge. And the gist of it is this, that are people familiar with this, by the way? A few people, yeah. Anyway, what it is, it's a schedule by which buildings will become more energy efficient over time. And so by 2010, he is, oops, excuse me, I'm sorry, that's the wrong slide. Whoops. I'll just tell you what it is. Gave you the wrong slide. By 2010, buildings, he's calling for them to be 60% more energy efficient than code, 2015, 70%, 2020, 80%, and by 2030, all buildings and major renovations shall be designed to be carbon neutral. Oh my God, you know, it's grab you by the collars and shake you time, right? And he wrote this standard. It's since been adopted by the Conference of Mayors, the Climate Change Mayors, AIA, APA. Everybody's adopted it, and nobody knows what the hell to do about it. But what's cool about it as a virus is that it's out there, it's on the books, we voted for it, we're somehow supposed to pay attention to it. And so it's that kind of slow burn fuse, I think. So we want to do the same thing for, so this is just to say, in our practice at Farr Associates, we are designing buildings that meet and exceed what seemed to me not that many years ago to be an unimaginably ambitious standard of this Ed Mesria's 2030 challenge. So much so that we've got a series of buildings that are 50, 55, 70, and more than 100% more energy efficient than code. More than 100% efficient means you're actually zero net energy or net energy positive. So it didn't seem like this was possible. This is completely possible. And so what I assert to you is that it was the call to leadership. It was the urge to say, let's set ourselves a bar way high or a goal way far until he's done that. So what we want to do is to do that same thing for land use. So here it is. Draft form. I should stamp it draft, don't do this yet, don't do this at home, whatever the warnings should read. But the 2030 Community Challenge is a similar draft standard. It steals the format, then essentially the name from Ed Mesria with his permission. By the way, we're not sneaking anything away. He knows this is going on. But the initial theme that we've given this is planning to drive less. And so it aims to set a similar ambitious goal. So just to dramatize how much Americans drive a year, here's the planet. There's a little sort of animation that went on. And per person per year, Americans drive 8,150 miles. And so that's from the North Pole to, somewhere in southern Brazil, per year, per person. Per family, the number's obviously much bigger, and that is 21,500 miles per family per year. And so it is not quite around the planet per year, but it's damn close, and it's on a trajectory to be there. So we're driving distances that I think we would all agree are not sustainable. Now, back to those efficiency slides, remember that? The light bulb, the car, and the building. There is the perception that somehow the efficiency of vehicles or a magical fuel will somehow allow us to continue to do this more and more. I submit to you, it's not going to happen. And I'm not here, I don't have the slides, that's another lecture for another person to give. What I would say is the opportunity for those of us who are architects and planners, developers, and the like, is to find the development opportunity in a plan to reduce vehicle miles traveled and build it. So here you go. So here's the 20th century American driving patterns. By 1910, we were driving something like 100 miles. In 1930, it was 1,000 miles per person. In 1969, the number is tracked at 3,950 miles per person. In 2000, the number jumped, as I said, to 8,150 miles per person. So we are driving more and more, and the trajectory is obviously to go higher and higher. So the plan for 2030, the other thing that happened is, for the architects in the room and people concerned with urban design and urbanism, is that when you experience the country at 50 miles an hour, we just don't really care what it looks like. And so as, the urbanists trace the kind of the end of traditional urbanism is sometime pre-war. It just so happens that's when we really started driving quite a lot. And so I submit to you that when you experience a city in a car at high speeds, you don't care what it looks like or how it's built. And so the Walmart that's all made out of foam and it's going to fall apart in 5 years is actually sort of rational, right? And so if we want architecture to be relevant or important again, this is actually, essential to getting there. So the goal for 2030 is to do the unimaginable, which is to change course at a very high clip. So let's put this out there. So here's the proposal. It's a 2% per year VMT reduction, And akin to what Ed Mesria has said, by 2030 we would drive half what we do now. So that takes us back to essentially 1969, which was the year of the Ford Mustang and Plymouth Barracuda. If you're of a certain age, you remember the Plymouth Barracuda. It was a really fun car with a long glass back. So it's not going back to, I don't know, the Middle Ages or, prehistoric times. We're not going to have bones, stuck in our heads or anything like that. It's modern living, but it's driving half as much. And what's interesting about this as a challenge is the early years are kind of fun to think about it. If you think about it for yourself as an individual, it's like, last year I know you took some trip you wished you hadn't, right? So that's like easy, 2%, wow, I don't have to go to, my mother-in-law's, whatever your bad trip for last year was, you don't have to take it this year, and you can blame it on the 2030 architecture challenge. So that's fun. But this goes beyond the conduct of individuals or even of corporations or municipalities. The tagline here, planning to drive less, is one that says our regions and our cities need to be resilient. We don't know, I'm not a doom and gloom guy, really. I'm an optimist, but I also think that it's the role of municipalities and leaders to make a built environment where people can succeed, have worthy, healthy, prosperous lives, while they are prepared in case oil goes to $200 a barrel, or in case other things happen where the way we are going is just not sustainable. So I think it's the 2030 challenge is a call to plan and a call to invest in land use and transportation integration into neighborhoods and into corridors. And I think it's really, gosh darn exciting. Just to go back to the kind of the evil Atlanta, which is, the United States poster child for doing it wrong. There's a new project that's just come open called Atlantic Station. And you'd think, gee, there's no hope for Atlanta. Well, Atlantic Station was built. It's a mixed-use project sort of in the center of town. And I mentioned Atlanta drives on average 35 miles a day. Atlantic Station has more than 1,000 units, drives on average 8 miles a day. 8 miles a day. Opened last year. It's a 75% reduction over the Atlanta average. So there's hope. There's absolutely hope. And the challenge of this, by the way, the 2030 challenge, a couple things. It's been adopted by the CNU, likely with maybe some adjustments to the numbers, as an aspirational goal to figure out over the next year how this might actually work across the country. And when you look at the map of Atlanta, the people that live in downtown Atlanta don't drive hardly at all. Take that to Manhattan or take that to central Vancouver, how much less can people that barely drive, right? So that a lot of the gain is going to come from the people that are living in the orange areas. So that's a real challenge, but it's a real opportunity. So anyway, what I wanted to say is the other thought here is that how do you get to transportation and land use integration? Obviously, I'm a big fan of LEED ND. I think we're going to fix it and make it great. But the thought is that we would, ask municipalities across the country to adopt LEED ND at a platinum level increasingly over the years so that they are grabbing more and more walkable neighborhoods and corridors. So that's the thought. And so here's the plan for the next year: to have all these organizations work out the details of what it means and adopt the 2030 challenge, and to embed it in the upcoming transportation bill, which gets reauthorized in 3 years. So, and this is my closing slide for this talk, and it just asks the question: when you know that you have to fix the light bulbs, you have to make the cars more fuel efficient, you have to make the buildings green and efficient, and you have to make neighborhoods and you have to make corridors. And that the light bulb is something you might be able to do in just a few years. As a country or as a society, as a continent, if we wanted the light bulbs to be different, we could do it in just a couple of years. But if we wanted to do corridors and neighborhoods across the country, we know they take decades and decades. And so if you have to do all 5 of those things, the question is, which one do you start first? the one that takes 5 years or the one that takes decades. And as a society, it's interesting because we've actually started on the left. We're starting in the wrong place. So this moment of pause is to say, I think this is a great opportunity. The best framing on the challenges I think that we have right now, to my mind, comes from Bill Clinton. Not the guy I go to for this kind of advice, but he has it down, and his line is basically, you know, the way I see it is that climate change and the threat of environmental degradation is the largest economic development opportunity that we've had since the Second World War. And so I'm an optimist. I think that filling out the national agenda and making those two things on the right commodities, that is, that many, many people can understand what they are, champion them, cause them to happen, it's just a really exciting opportunity. So that's what the book's about, and you've heard enough of me, so hopefully we can have some Q&A. Thank you.